Okay, so we've talked about masking and we've talked about solids, and we understand that a mask is really a spline that we can add on top of a layer, and that determines what we see and what we don't see. Now we're going to talk about matting, which is something that's completely different than masking, but some of the principles can apply. Some people will go, masking and matting, and that's all the same thing. But really, if you understand them as two really distinct things, then you'll gain a distinct advantage in your work. I find mats to be incredibly helpful for 3D compositing and other visual effects, particularly as it pertains to visual effects and video editing and all that stuff. So matting is really something that's core to understanding visual effects, and the difference between that and masking, is a really important distinction to understand them as two different things. You can use masking as a means of matting, so you can build a really complex set of masking to matte something, and that's one way you can do transitions and things like that, and layer stuff one thing over top of another. But anyhow, we'll maybe get into that a little bit later as we discuss, how masking and matting kind of overlap and work together. But for the time being, though, let's talk really quickly about matting. First thing, I have a new composition here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a video in there, right? So we've seen this video before. It's a 3D printer, and on top of that, I'm actually going to add another layer. This layer is particularly interesting because I took some food dye and or some food coloring rather, and I was putting it through some water and I was taping it, and I had some interesting visual effects, and I was able to matte it down to a black and white matte to get some, just some really interesting visual effects. So the interesting part about this is a black and white image primarily that has a lot of distinct color value in it. So I can go in here and now I've got the toggle between switches and modes here. So I can go down here and I can toggle between my switches and my modes, and I want to be on modes. We've talked about blending modes and how that matters. Well, when I've got one image when I've got one layer on top of another, I can go ahead and I can change the track matte mode for that layer to take a particular aspect of this layer that's above and use that as an alpha channel for this. So it's a little bit of it's a complicated concept to just tell you in words. It's just much easier for me to show you how this works. So track matte, there's different track matte modes. Alpha matte mode really takes the alpha channel from the layer above and uses that as the alpha channel for the layer below. Pretty basic, right? Alpha inverted matte, takes the opposite of the alpha channel. Sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't. Luma Matte is something that I use the most. It's really good for 3D compositing if you go and you create matte layers for things to block things out or to change color of things or to gain an extra level of control over something. You're going to use a lot of Luma matting with solids to go ahead and do that. But right here, we're going to use Luma Matte and Luma Inverted Matte, pretty self-explanatory too. So why don't we go ahead and try Luma Matte and we'll see what happens. And already we're starting to see the transparency grid coming through here, right? So let me add a solid underneath of this. And let me just make it a really obnoxious color so that you get the point about what's underneath right? So we've got a solid matte underneath, right? And this, or rather magenta matte. And this dye here, this dye video is actually cutting through the Luma Matte is actually cutting through this layer. It's taking the black from this and it's using that to block out the alpha channel on this, which can become a pretty handy dandy thing once you start working with it. And it looks like I've taken the pink and put it on top, but really I'm cutting a hole in this, right? So if I was to invert that, obviously I'm getting the video portion that's showing up on top of that there. So there's different ways that you could do this, but hopefully some of you are starting to see the possibilities of taking the color values off of one thing and using that to matte underneath, right? So let's continue this a little bit and maybe let's try to find a way to make a very interesting transition. Maybe not out of video. Maybe what we can do is we can maybe construct a very interesting transition to go over top of this. So Let me go ahead and change the track matte mode to no track matte. I'm going to delete my dye layer since as much as we like it, we're going to get rid of it and not keep it at the moment. Maybe I want to create a really interesting transition between two videos, right? And it's a little bit above and beyond and out of the ordinary for me to go ahead here and do a transition, something I couldn't get out of Premiere. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to Files, and let me pull another piece of video in, so something that'll be easy for me to transition between. Right, so it's going to go ahead. I'm going to pull in this this video of Kevin having a conversation with somebody at 3D Printing Night. So I've got two pieces of video footage, and maybe I want to create a really interesting transition that shows this printer here, and then I want to transition out into that. Well, interestingly enough, I can go ahead here and I can add a solid, and I can make the solid. Let's just concentrate on black and white values. Right now, I'm going to make it black, and this is going to be just an underlay for another layer to go on top, a solid layer that's going to be white. So let's go ahead and make another solid and make this white. So I think you may be onto what I'm trying to do here. I've got a white on top of black solid, and really I can go now in and I can use the pen tool and I can mask an interesting shape out of this, right? So I've got my white solid here, and I've got my pen tool selected. So now I can go in here and I can maybe go in here and add something like this in here, and I can matte this particular portion of it out, right? All right, good. So you can see here that I've got a white solid here, and I can go ahead and I can position it. I can move it around, right? I can manipulate the mask. Pretty much anything I do here creates a black and white mask. So maybe what I want to do is I want to take this and I want to duplicate it, and I can scale it backwards, right? Interestingly enough, I can take that, make it 100, right? There's all different ways to do this, right? Many ways to skin a cat in After Effects, but say maybe I want, my transition to look a little bit like these two doors kind of coming together. We're not going for accuracy here, or craft. We're just trying to just make something happen here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna keyframe the positions, and maybe this is the last place where I want this to end up on, right? So maybe it's a 1 second transition. So I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna make that be the end value, and then I'm gonna go to the beginning here, and maybe I want this to ease in here, right? So I've got that, and then I'm going to select this, and I'm going to ease this over to the left here. I'm sorry, over to the right here. And then what do we got? Well, we've got black and white, and it's coming together, right? And that's great, and that looks, that looks fairly nice. But what does this have to do with our video and our track matte? Well, some of you may have already guessed as I go in here and I set these up to do easy ease, so they get an interesting effect here, right? What some of you may be onto is that, and hey, why not put motion blur on them, right? You only live once. Fun. Yeah, fun. Great. That gives us a nice little effect there. So I'm going to save that. So this is interesting because what this gives us is a custom track matte that we can use to transition one video into another. So this is where this comes in handy. One thing that's really important though is that we have to take these layers. If I were to go in here and I was to track matte this, I'm going to, if I go in here and I track matte this rep wrap layer and I track matte it to, I track matte it to a black solid, it's just not going to show up because it's all black. Well, one thing that's really important here is pre-composing. So I'm going to shift select all of these, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pre-compose by right-clicking. Pre-composing is really important because this needs to be a single composition so that those values can be passed down, those color values can be passed down to here. So you'll find yourself doing a lot of pre-composing. I'm going to call this transition matte. And then what it's going to do is it's going to move all the attributes into a new composition. That's definitely what we want. And now I've got this down to a single composition. And since it's a single composition, I could take this and I can do a Luma Matte on it. Interestingly enough, my rep wrap video is here, but as you notice now, it's taking that matte and it's applying the black and white over top of that Luma Matte to transition between those videos in a more interesting fashion. So here he is talking, right? Let's preview that. Here he is talking, and then we've transitioned over to the rep wrap, right? So the interesting part about this is that you can apply effects to that, and those effects and space and time and all that stuff applies to directly through the track matte, which makes it really handy to work with. So maybe we want this to kind of transition over a little bit later, right? So once we're kind of more focused on him talking, and boom. It was just that easy for me to do that dynamically on the fly. So that's why track mattes are really important to use, and that's why masking can complement track mattes. Don't think of them as two different practices. So just a little tip for you that hopefully will help. Track matting, really important.